On today's podcast, a full breakdown of what became a 115 to 105 loss for the Atlanta Hawks in Game 2 down in Miami. A much more competitive effort from the Hawks, a much more respectable performance on the whole for Atlanta. They were in this game throughout. In fact, it was a three-point game down the stretch, but Jimmy Butler had other ideas for the Miami Heat. He was fantastic for Miami, and the Hawks came up just short. They were down by 16 points late, had a furious comeback behind Bogdanovic and some hot shooting down the stretch, but not quite enough to get over the hump. And the Hawks will return home on Friday, down 0-2 in the series. Still a lot to play for, and honestly, some positives to take away from this contest, but still some shortcomings as well for the Hawks. We'll get into all of that and have the full breakdown of this game and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1223 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And thank you for joining us, as always, on the podcast and making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Today's podcast will be getting into, of course, what became a 10-point loss for the Hawks in Game 2 down in Miami. It was probably closer than that throughout this contest. And while it was still a loss and the Hawks are down 2-0, in the playoff series, best of 7, of course. A lot of positives compared to Game 1. Obviously, that's a low bar to clear. Game 1 was a pretty catastrophically bad performance in a lot of ways for the Hawks, even when you had some excuses with the travel and all of that stuff, but it was not really competitive. Game 2 was much more competitive. The Hawks did play much better in this game. They were in the game all the way through. Unfortunately, Jimmy Butler had other ideas for Miami. He was, let's just say, fantastic in this one with 45 points, a playoff career high for a guy who's been in a lot of playoff games. But Atlanta was better. They were competitive. We'll have lots of stuff to get into on both sides, both positive and negative. Bogdanovic almost carried them back into this game. The Hawks were down by 16 points. About 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and had a 12-0 run, almost immediately got within 3, had a shot in the air from Trae Young that would have tied the game in the final minutes. It did not go in, and from there it was all Miami, but still, this was certainly in doubt into the final minutes, and we'll get into how that all sort of affects and sort of informs the look ahead to Game 3, Game 4 as the Hawks come back to Atlanta, where they've been very, very good in recent days. So we'll get into the game as always. If you're a new listener, welcome aboard, number one, and also number two, what we do here on this podcast, try to give you the overarching look at every game, and then in between games, some more broad analysis, but certainly on these game podcasts, pre-game context throughout this game, also just kind of what transpired, the nuts and bolts, my own opinions and analysis and observations, some player-by-player breakdowns. At the end of the podcast, we'll sort of look ahead to Game 3 and Game 4. Coming into the night, obviously the Hawks kind of trying to rebound from a bad performance on Sunday afternoon. John Collins was off the injury report, ended up starting in this game at center. Still no Clint Capella for Atlanta in this game, or Lou Williams. For what it's worth, Travis Schlenk, the president of basketball operations for the Hawks, did a radio interview on Tuesday. If you are a diehard Hawks fan, you will know how these interviews go. Travis usually says some stuff that's kind of aggressive, at least certainly noteworthy at times. And he said on Tuesday that Capella will have a reevaluation on Friday. That does align with what ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski reported earlier this week about reevaluation. I always stress reevaluation does not mean return. That means they're going to look at him on Friday. We'll see. But he said on the radio that they dodged a bullet was the way that he phrased it with Capella. And also, though, he has a small bone bruise is the way that Schlenk said that on the radio with regard to Capella's knee. Maybe some swelling there for Capella. He has to get his strength back in the knee, but they're hoping for better news over the weekend. Obviously, they play a game on Friday. He's not going to be playing Friday. I'd be stunned by that. So I guess maybe best possible case scenario, he plays on Sunday in Game 4. But alas, the Hawks certainly missed Clint Capella. I said that a lot in Game 1. It was the case here, too. If the Hawks had Capella, this series would be a lot more competitive so far through 2 games, I'd imagine, because Capella does a lot of things that the Hawks just don't have anybody else to do. And he's so good at certain aspects of rebounding and diving into the rim and all that stuff defensively. Alas, he's not been out there for the Hawks. Miami was at full strength in this game as well. There were some guys that were actually questionable on the injury report, including Bam Adebayo, who ended up playing. Didn't play very well, actually, by his standards, but he played in this one. And BetOnline, our sponsors and friends of the podcast, made the Hawks a 7.5-point underdog in this one. They actually did not cover. I'm sure Hawks fans that took that line not exactly thrilled, because the Hawks were probably in position to cover that spread until the very end, but they did not actually sort of pull that off at the end of this one. The first bit of interesting sort of observation here is that John Collins started at center in this game. Now, I wasn't surprised at all by that. We saw in Game 1 that essentially without Capella, Nate chose to play either Collins or a Collingwood center for all 48 minutes. And by the way, that happened again tonight. But the thing is, they did not play him at all at the 4. He was basically the starting center and the primary center in this game. Collingwood did not play super well off the bench. But I didn't mind it. I think getting Collins out there, even if he's sort of in a reduced state as he is right now, he's not his full self. I think that's pretty obvious physically. But still, he's out there and giving them more than they've gotten some other places for sure. Starting him, playing him at center, I had no problem with that whatsoever. And he gives them a lot more offense. We saw in this game, especially when he was out there on offense, they were just much more effective beating switches and all that stuff, as we talked about yesterday on the podcast with Tower Jones. So I like that decision from Collins. It's more aggressive, but he played 29 minutes and no signs of slowing down. We still do not know if he has a limitation. I'm sure he does on some level, but he played almost a regular workload in this game, which is worth noting after only his second game back from the injury. The Hawks did score first in this game, actually had a great possession to open the game, had a Kevin Huerter three-pointer, and then, of course, they missed their next 6 shots and lost kind of the plot a little bit offensively. They had a lob to Collins that he usually finishes that he couldn't make. They missed a couple of good looks on jump shots, and then Miami scored 10 points in a row to go up by 7 points at the outset. I thought the process, though, throughout the game was better on offense for the Hawks. I thought Trae Young did press a lot through this one. He actually he sort of did find his stride at times as a scorer. That's, to be fair, he actually was better in this game than he was in game 1, but some turnovers for sure. Miami kicked the ball around a little bit early on in this game. And as a reminder, just broadly to inform this dialogue, the Heat actually struggle mightily with ball security. This season, they were number 28 in the league. That's third worst in the league in turnover rate on offense. They do turn the ball over a lot, whereas the Hawks were number 1 in the league in turnover rate. And spoiler alert, the Hawks had more turnovers in this game than Miami did. And then McMillan, at the end of the game, said number 1 on his list, basically. He led the press conference talking about how the fact that they cannot turn the ball over like they did in this game. I would agree that was a huge, huge point of emphasis in the negative direction for the Hawks in this one. That was the case really throughout the contest. Rotationally, as a note for here from the Hawks, they only played 8 guys. For the most part. There was a little bit of TLC when they had to use him. He was the 9th guy, played 3 minutes. There was one possession in the first quarter where they got Trae off the floor for a defense only trip. It was a good decision by McMillan. And then there was a point later on, which we'll come back to, where Hunter, Huerter, and Bogdanovic all had serious foul trouble. And in order to avoid getting them any more foul trouble, they brought in TLC for 2 more minutes. He doesn't have too much heft to guard Butler, but at least he was their best option other than Hunter. It's kind of a very low bar, let's just say, but that's why they brought him back in there. Otherwise, though, 8 guys who played and lots of fouls throughout this contest on all sides, including Miami. The Hawks did lead, actually, late in the first quarter. Miami scored about 3 points in almost 4 minutes. Defensively, it was pretty attentive along the way. It looked a lot more like the first part of game 1 than the rest of game 1. Throughout this game, they were pretty good defensively. I know Butler got off, and he's a star player. And by the way, Jimmy Butler, I'm not as high on him sometimes on his offensive game. But I'll say this, if he's making jump shots, which he was in this game, he's very hard to stop because that's the thing he has not been able to do the last couple of years is make jumpers, especially threes. And in this game, of course, he made jumpers, and that makes him very difficult to defend. He had a big run late in the first quarter at 8-0 to take the lead. Hunter, though, I thought played very well early on in this game. DeAndre Hunter will come back to later on with all of the player evaluations, but I thought Hunter, especially in the first quarter, was really aggressive, had 9 points. He had a nice tip-in of a pass by Huerter at the buzzer to get the Hawks back within 1. And good to see him kind of come out with a vengeance in the early part of this game. And I thought he played well in the first half in particular. The Hawks were down by 1 at the end of the first quarter. They actually came back to Bogey, who had 2 fouls to start the second quarter because Trae Young had to leave the floor as he always does. That's sort of a no-brainer to me, and I'm glad that McMillan did it. But, of course, it actually came back to bite him. Bogdanovic only averages 2.1 fouls per game, which is extremely low for a guy who plays as much as he does. But basically, Bogey committed a very, very bad foul for his third. He got stripped and had a frustration play that only a guy who's a veteran should not be making. He fouled Gabe Vincent about 80 feet from the rim, and they had to go back to Trae much earlier than usual in the first half as a result of that. As a sidebar, the entire game was marred by fouls. There were 19 fouls in this first 16 minutes. There were 50 fouls in this game in 48 minutes. I know there was a game actually taking place during this one. Memphis and Minnesota was even more so dominated by fouls if you're watching that game on a second screen. But I know Hawks fans, so I'll just say this now and probably come back to it later on. Officiating was a discussion point, let's just say, on Twitter and other places. I thought the Hawks did not get a good whistle in this game. I don't think it was as bad as some Hawks fans probably think that it was. But there were lots of fouls called on all sides, and Miami got a couple of more high leverage calls go their way. That's for sure. I don't think the Hawks got the greatest whistle in this spot, but certainly lots of impact because guys like Hunter and Herter and Bogdanovic and Bam Adebayo and PJ Tucker on Miami side. So that's 5 of the top 10 guys in this game probably playing. All had foul issues throughout the night, and that certainly affects how the game flow is going in this spot. Later on, there was actually probably the best play of the game from Okongwu. We had a nice steal and dunk in transition. Kind of a reminder of what he can do when he's right. I will say though he was not fantastic in this game. That was just a great little flash play by him. The histrionics that happened in the second quarter was DeAndre Hunter and Kyle Lowry were really jawing midway through the quarter. Ended up being a double technical foul. It really didn't really stop there. They actually kept going. And usually DeAndre Hunter is the last guy you would think would be in a tussle like that, especially verbally with Kyle Lowry. But Kyle Lowry is, let's just say, not shy. He's already had a handful of, let's just say, questionable plays in this series so far, even through 2 games. And he was certainly getting under Hunter's skin. They're both from Philadelphia. I'm not sure if that was any part of that. But yeah, notable that Hunter was certainly jawing it up with Lowry at that point in time. But the Hawks just kept turning the ball over, unfortunately. Plus the huge foul trouble. They had 30 fouls and a half is crazy. 50 for the full game is crazy, but 30 in the first half is just nuts. They had to close the half with Trae Young, DeLon Wright, TLC, Gallinari, and Collins. And Miami had to go to Tucker at center with Bam in foul trouble as well. And Butler got off against TLC in that brief stretch. Again, not shocking, but that did happen. Neither team, though, led by more than 4 points in the second quarter. It was a much sort of back and forth kind of close fought quarter of play. Offensively, the Hawks, as we'll get into later on, struggled at most things except for 2-point shooting. They actually were good inside the arc in this game. They had 10 turnovers in the first half. That's really way too many. Trae had 18 points. Good to see him bounce back. He was not as good in the second half efficiency-wise and production-wise, but Hunter was good before halftime. Defensively, I thought the Hawks played pretty well in that first half. Miami outshot them, but not by a ton. They actually limited the Heat to only 13 three-point attempts in that first half, which is not a small thing. They did foul too much, though, which was a problem throughout the game, really. They forced turnovers and played well on the defensive glass, but we'll come back to how that all impacted things later on. Still, when comparing the first half of Game 2 to Game 1, it was night and day. The Hawks were in the game. They were down only 2 at the half and certainly sort of took another great shot from Miami and bounced back and were still in the game. We'll get into all what happened after that in a moment. But before we get to that and everything else for this podcast, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed frames that are also durable, and premium high-end finishes. And on top of that, Shady Rays has a great protection program that's something you just can't find anywhere else. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every single pair, and they will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try today. If you don't love them, you want to pay anything at all, it's as simple as that. Plus, with every purchase, there are 10 meals donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners as well, head to shadyrays.com, use the promo code LOCKEDON. If you do that, 50% off of 2 pairs or more of polarized sunglasses. That's promo code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the entire season. That's 50% off on 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses backed by 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Check it all out today at shadyrays.com. Use promo code LOCKEDON, 50% off on 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses, shadyrays.com. All right, in an unfortunate tone early in the third quarter, the Hawks committed 2 turnovers in the first 90 seconds, and that was a little bit of foreshadowing of how bad the ball security would be at times, really the entire game. I will say the foul stuff came back, though. Bam got his 4th foul right away for Miami, had to sit out, which is a pretty big opportunity because Bam is, of course, their second best or best player, depending on how you look at things for Miami. But right away, Hunter got his 4th foul, had to sit. That threw off his rhythm, I thought, in this game. That was a pretty soft call as well against Hunter for his 4th. And Miami pulled up an 8-2 run, took their largest lead of the game at that point. And while they did sort of counteract that with Bogdanovic and Herter hitting threes, Bogey got his 4th foul almost right away. And he actually stayed in the game kind of out of desperation because they couldn't go deeper into the bench at that point. But it was very clear that he knew he couldn't foul. So the next possession, after he got his 4th foul, he let Butler just waltz into the lane for an easy layup, which is not the greatest sign in the world. And then it became an 11-0 run later on from Miami to go from up by 2 to up by 13. And that kind of broke it out a little bit towards the Heat. Butler was really feeling it at that point. He was 3 of 4 from 3. And by the way, I believe he shot 23% from 3 this season. So kind of a little bit of bad luck there for the Hawks. But they were turning the ball over like crazy and certainly scuffling. They were down by 14 later in the third quarter. Miami actually had an open 3 that would have been at 17. Didn't fall. The Hawks did get back with an 8 briefly late in the third quarter. Trae got a technical foul, actually. with about 2 seconds to go. I didn't bite them because Butler actually missed the free throw. If you saw, I'm not going to repeat it on the podcast. If you saw what Trey said to the official, you will note that that's usually going to get your technical foul, and he repeated it twice. There was a swear word, and the word trash was in there as well. You can probably watch that clip if you want to. I think Trey probably earned the technical foul, even if he was probably right about the complaint that he was making. Regardless, though, the Hawks were able to keep in that range of like 10, 12 points for most of that third quarter. They were down 11 points at the end of the third. And the problem was offense. They had only 74 points on 74 possessions through 3 quarters. That's not going to be enough, especially for an offense first team like the Hawks. They just got to score, and they had 17 turnovers through 3 quarters. They only ended up, I say only, with 19, which is still bad, but 17 through 3 is very, very, very rough from the Hawks. Trey had 9 turnovers through 3 quarters of this game, and defensively they were able to do their job other than stopping Butler, but they let Miami get a little bit looser with 3-point attempts in the third quarter, and that kind of bit them along the way. I will say this just to be positive. The Hawks were pretty good on the glass defensively in this game, but the one negative on that was that they gave a back-to-back put-back buckets to old pal Dwayne Dedmon in the fourth quarter. That kind of that just can't happen. Dwayne's not the greatest rebounder in the world either. Although he was good in this game for Miami, I thought. That's just a spot where you cannot afford to do that when you're already down by 11 points. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but the Hawks were down by 16 points with 9 minutes to go. And then immediately started chipping away. So it was Hunter got a 3-point play, which was nice to see. And then they brought Collins and Trey back in, down by 13 points with 8:18 to go. They were only -2 without Trey. That's doable for this team. But from there was the biggest stretch of the game from the Hawks' perspective. It was a 12-0 run to go from down 16 to down by 4. Bogey had 10 points in about 2.5 minutes. It was nearly 11 points. One of his jumpers was a foot on the line 2-pointer that almost was the 3. But he went nuclear in the fourth quarter. He was the reason why the Hawks were able to stay close in that fourth period. And it wasn't just the offense either that was good. They played good defense. Miami was 3 of 13 from the floor to start the fourth quarter. And the Hawks did sort of chip away, and Bogey obviously with some haymakers along the way there. Miami did sort of rebound from there with the 10th turnover by Trae Young, leading to a nice easy layup from the Heat to go back up by 9. But after that, the Hawks scored. DeLon Wright, that man again, where he's always doing little things, got a steal on Bam Adebayo. And then Trey made a 3 and was back to 4 again. So I'll go a little bit of play-by-play here down the stretch with the Hawks down by 4. They finally got Jimmy Butler to miss a jump shot, down 4. And then Trey missed a very easy layup that he usually makes that he would definitely want back. I said that I watched the replay again. He might have gotten fouled. I was kind of bumped, but that's a shot he's got to make. He just didn't make it. And then they call timeout. So they're down by 4. Still plenty of time, like 3.5, 4 minutes to go. But then they give up an easy bucket to Jimmy Butler on a drive and a drop off to Bam Adebayo. But then Bogey hit a ridiculous kind of fadeaway curling 3 in the right corner that was just a reminder of how hot he was at that point. Then they got to stop when Tyler Hero missed a pretty good look. And then, as I highlighted earlier in the podcast, Trey had a shot for the tie coming off the curl that was a good look. It wasn't like a wide open shot, but certainly a decent look for Trey that he missed. If that goes in, it's a tie game. It doesn't go in. And then on the other end of the floor, Butler goes right by Hunter and Trey for a dunk very easily to go back up by 5. And that was kind of the single biggest possession swing, was that 3 into a dunk by Butler. Then after that, Bogey finally missed a jump shot. He was probably due to miss one, obviously, not his fault. But after a review and a challenge, Miami gets the ball back down 5. And then Butler hits a dagger 3 off of a curl on the right wing. A pretty crazy shot that, he just was in the zone on this one. That kind of just happens. It's make or miss league in some ways, and that he made it. So that's that sequence from missed three by Trey to easy dunk to Bogey finally misses one to a review that goes Miami's way to Butler making a 3, goes from up 3 and maybe even down 3 and maybe even tied to down by 8. And then Bogey missed again. Butler scored again, and it was down by 10 with 120 to go. And basically at that point, it's over. It wasn't actually over. The Hawks had a chance, but down 10 with 120, your odds are, let's just say, astronomical. And the comeback bid kind of stopped there. So we'll put a pin in it for now, but certainly the Hawks were in this game, as I said before. They had a shot in the air to tie the game. They were still down by only 5 with the ball with 2.5 minutes to go. You're still an underdog there, obviously, and the Hawks were down for the vast majority of the second half. So you want to point that out. Certainly that's a realistic thing to say. But, they were in the game. Broadly speaking now, offensively in this one, I thought the Hawks should be credited for making some adjustments that were notable. I think McMillan, as much as I don't believe in him too much as an offensive, like creative guy and like adjustment guy on offense, he made some nice tweaks to the offense in this game. They ran better stuff overall. They had some more room to operate and generally played better. Their execution was better, except for turnovers, which we'll come back to. But I thought the Hawks did make some good adjustments. They had Collins in particular slipping. Having him play more was certainly just helpful in itself. But they got Trey some more room. They were not as flummoxed by it. They definitely had a plan that was very clear to attack the switches, and they were certainly more effective with it than anything else. Miami's still really good on defense, but the Hawks did play better. Not good enough, though, in a few key areas. They were very good inside the arc for this game. They shot more than 60% from 2-point range. That's excellent, but 12 of 40 from three. And it's just tough for the Hawks to win, especially against a good team on the road when they're 12 of 40 from three. And it would have been worse if Bogey didn't go crazy in the fourth quarter. They were actually below that 30% mark for most of the game. They won the glass on both ends of the floor. That's a positive. But here's the big one. As McMillan said, as I sort of stressed even before Nate did, 19 turnovers and 21 assists. Now, assist-wise, that's not like a terrible number. It's pretty bad. That's well below their average, but certainly not just catastrophic. But 19 turnovers just cannot happen. The Hawks, as I said before, led the NBA in ball security, and the Heat were number 28 in the NBA in ball security. The Hawks' blueprint to win games in the series does not include committing 4 turnovers more than the Heat did in this game. That just cannot happen. Everyone knows it. But Trey having 10 of them on his own is bad enough. But between that and only 14 free throw attempts, that's just a bad way to win the math battle. Like, I know it's not all about that. You got to make shots too. But if you don't make threes, you turn them all over, and you don't create free throw attempts, you can't win, basically. Not that you can't, but it's certainly almost impossible to win a game on the road against a good team when you don't do those things. Defensively, I thought it wasn't terrible for most of the game. Obviously, Butler provided them some challenges. I think one of the reminders in this game is that other than Hunter, who is not always like a dominant defender, I think Hunter has the makings of that, has the physical profile for it, and usually is pretty solid. But other than him, I want to stress it was not his fault. Other than him, they don't have anybody else to put on Jimmy Butler. And if Hunter gets foul trouble or if Hunter is out of the game, it's tough. They can put Bogey on him physicality-wise. He's pretty strong, but Bogey had foul trouble in this game. Herter is better on guards, but it's not great on someone like Butler, who's like a combo 3-4, big physical guy. TLC is not someone they want to play a lot in this series. So, like, I know it's a tough matchup, but that's a reminder of that. They had some breakdowns along the way for sure. They were more connected, though, I thought, overall. I thought it was just kind of a reminder of their general shortcomings, but I thought the Hawks did play better and play more consistently and with more energy defensively in this game. Miami, though, did have a 63% true shooting mark. That's obviously excellent. They got to the line for 29 attempts. That's more than double the Hawks. Certainly, part of that is that they got some calls. But Miami is just better at getting the line than the Hawks are overall, especially when you kind of limit Trey. He's kind of the one guy on the Hawks roster that gets to the line a lot. And again, the turnover battle goes to Miami and 20 fast break points for the Heat. Part of that is the Hawks turning the ball over, but the Hawks cannot afford to have them giving up that kind of transition stuff to Miami in this spot either. So we'll come back to the individual player evaluations, but certainly as a broad synopsis, the Hawks were better on both ends of the floor than they were in game one, but they also were not good enough on either end of the floor. I think offensively in particular, you can kind of live with this defensive performance from the Hawks because you don't think that Butler's going to do this again, at least not repeatedly in this series. And if he had just been more like his normal star self versus a super duper star self in this game, the Hawks would have been just fine defensively. But the offense, this is a team that has to win with its offense. We've seen that all year long. And even against a good Miami defense, the Hawks cannot have a 106 offensive rating. It's not quite that simple in some ways, but it is very tough for the Hawks to win if they're not going to score even a league average clip, and I didn't do that in this game. Okay, before we get into the individual player evaluations, a word from our sponsors on today's show. I made it a goal of mine this year to actually eat right and really just eat better in general. I'm having a lot of success with that, and the biggest part of the process is Built Bar. In some ways, it's actually a lot easier for me to eat better because I actually enjoy eating Built Bars on a regular basis. They have the protein-infused puff bars that are awesome. It's all the other fan favorites from Built Bar, and each and every bar has 100% real chocolate, which makes a huge difference both in taste and texture. And really, they all taste fantastic. On top of that, though, Built Bar is low calorie and high protein. You can easily replace all of your candy bars with Built Bars this year, both in taste and to improve your nutrition overall. Built.com has all the answers to the questions that you're looking for right now, and you won't believe what you see. With most Built Bars, have only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. with a very low calorie count on top of that. And Built Bar has longtime flavors like coconut almond, lemon almond cheesecake, as well as new flavors coming all the time. And I've never had a bad Built Bar flavor. They're all awesome, and I really do mean that at this point. And the best way to check out Built Bar is to go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15. If you do that, 50% off on your order with Built Bar. That's promo code LOCK15, 15% off at Built.com. We'll dive in now to the player evaluations at the end of the podcast, and only 9 guys to touch on, really only 8 guys, to be honest with you, to get into here. TLC didn't play enough to really talk about. I mentioned before, but having him go out there and try to put the flame out on Butler is tough for him. I think that he was a reasonable guy to try with the foul trouble issues they were having, but not a guy that want to play a lot, had 2 fouls, and just couldn't really contain Butler, obviously. I thought Okongwu was not a huge factor in this game, and it's been a reminder to some that Okongwu was not quite ready for this just yet as a starter. I think he's fine as a backup guy. I think he's still a good player. He might be the best backup center in the league, but the drop off from Capella to Okongwu is just like, it's a large chasm right now. I thought he had a couple of flash plays for sure and rebounded well. I want to say that, often when Capella's off the floor, they get killed on the glass. It didn't happen in this game. So credit to Okongwu for that, at least in part. He had a steal and that dunk as well that I mentioned before, but offensively, he just kind of a little bit passive. I thought John Hollinger made an interesting point about Okongwu just not having the confidence to go off of 1 foot. He's kind of had some weird footwork stuff on offense in the course of the 2 games so far, maybe just some jitters too on the playoff stage, but that is what it is. He wasn't great in this game. I thought DeLon Wright was good. I know I'm sort of a meme of myself at this point, but I thought DeLon was once again quite effective. 9 points on 3 of 5 from the floor, 1 of 3 from 3. Got the line twice, made both. 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, +8. The only guy on the roster that was in the positive in this game, and not a coincidence. I think he probably honestly should have played more. When it came to the foul trouble issues they had and Gallo struggling, etc., I would have even played DeLon even more than he's been playing. He's been excellent in these 2 games. Unfortunately, nobody else has been very good, but especially even they might have to play, and DeLon's been really, really good. Bogey obviously was fantastic in the second half. In the fourth quarter in particular, he ended up with 29 points to lead the Hawks in scoring, only 18 shots. So that's a heck of a ratio there. 7 of 8 on 2s, 5 of 10 on 3s. No free throw attempts, but had 4 rebounds, 3 assists, only 1 turnover, had 5 fouls. But I think defensively he was not his best. Let's just say he's not always great anyway, but offensively, like, you can't argue. He was the one reason why the Hawks made that charge late. If he doesn't go crazy, the Hawks probably lose this game by 15 points. Obviously, they lost by 10 anyway, but maybe they'll lose by 20 if he has to do it. They were already down by 15, 16 points when he started going crazy in the fourth quarter. And, he's got to have it if Trey doesn't. And then Trey was better in this game, which we'll come back to later on. But Bogey is their number 2 guy on offense pretty clearly right now, and he had it. At least gave them a chance in this game. To the starters, the guy who struggled the most was Gallinari. This is very simplified. I do know that as I'm saying it out loud, but it's also kind of true. If Gallo scores 2 points on 7 shooting possessions, he can't play. And they have to play him. I'm not saying they don't, because they do, especially with this current iteration without Capella and Collins playing center, etc. There's nowhere to go to take Gallo off the floor, particularly on a night when everybody has foul trouble, including Hunter, who's their backup 4. But Gallo hurt them, let's just say, because Gallo defensively is always quite bad, and he's been bad in the series in 2 games. And in game 1, he was their best offensive player, and that helped to counteract that. It didn't matter in that game because they were getting blown out. But in this game, Gallo just is a tough sell if he's going to score 2 points on 7 shots. I don't have too much to add from that. I think he'll have better games. He's been playing a lot of minutes recently, probably more than they want to play him. But credit to Nate for not playing him too much. 22 minutes for Gallo was probably appropriate in this game. He just didn't have much to give them if he wasn't going to make shots. Kevin Huerter was okay from 3 with 3 of 7, but 0-3 on 2s. Did have 6 assists and 2 turnovers, so actually had a pretty good ball security game, 5 rebounds, a steal and a block. He was actually a game worst -17. I don't think that was on him necessarily, but he was on the floor with some of those bad lineups that did not work out very well in the big runs for Miami. I thought he was okay overall. He did a decent job on Hero and others on the perimeter. And honestly, if you look at the box score, the Heat did not in game 1. Actually, it was the supporting guys. It was Robinson, it was Tucker, etc. that kind of beat them up. In this game, the Hawks did a pretty good job on Lowry, Strus, Hero, and Robinson. It was just that Butler did everything he wanted to. In fact, Robinson played 7 minutes, which is a little bit strange after he was so good in game 1, but alas. Moving on from Huerter, I thought Hunter was good in the first half. He was not particularly good in the second half. 16 points, 15 shots, and 3 of 3 from the free throw line. So about a point per shot in this game. Not too bad efficiency wise. 2 rebounds though, always a problem for Hunter at times. Did have a block shot, had 5 fouls. Again, I don't think he was the big problem defensively. Obviously, Butler got the best of him. But if you watch the play-by-play breakdown, there were some moments when he was certainly not going to be great there. But between the fouls and everything else, I don't think he was a catastrophe defensively, but offensively, he's not terribly efficient. I thought he was really good and effective in the first half, and then he kind of lost the plot a little bit in the second half offensively. People got a little bit mad at me for game one. I don't think he was bad in game one. I don't think he was like a huge difference maker either. And listening to some broadcast, I was trying to watch both broadcasts, the local Valley sports broadcast as well as the national one, so I know what Hawks fans are hearing and seeing. And there's this narrative out there that Hunter is this established scorer number one and also like this like elite defender, and neither of those are true at this point in time. I'm not picking on Hunter too much there. I just think that if you don't watch the games every night from the Hawks, and I've seen every minute of his career more than once, you wouldn't necessarily know that. But I think defensively, he was the only guy that they had a chance on Butler. So that's not like, I'm not going to put that on him, even if it's the traditional NBA evaluation is like, oh, this guy was guarding this guy this many points, so it's all this guy's fault. And I get that, but I wouldn't say that about Hunter in this game. And then from there, Collins, I thought played admirably well. 13 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. It's also very clear to me that he's not his normal self, both explosion-wise, shooting-wise, all that stuff. At the free throw line, he's 1 of 3, 0 of 1 on threes. I don't think he's got his normal shooting stroke right now. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense with the finger being banged up as it is. And, clearly they are trusting him to play this many minutes. I think just having him out there is hugely helpful, and I think he is a lot better than the alternatives. But he isn't John Collins in capital letters. Both can be true, and we'll see how he fares in game 3. But I thought he was a positive. Overall, he's just going to have to adjust a little bit more, obviously, to not having his jump shot and also not having quite his normal burst after not playing and having the foot issue. And then Trey. When with Trey, as we often do, a mixed bag, let's say. He was better as a scorer. He was interesting in terms of like navigating screens and doing stuff. He was more in attack mode in game 2. 25 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds. Obviously, those are really good numbers. They're below Trey's averages, but he's still pretty good. He was not inefficient either. He had 25 points on 22 shooting possessions. He was 8 of 10 on twos, actually, but only 2 of 10 on threes. The big problem, though, was 10 turnovers. That's tough. I am someone who does not really pick on turnovers all that much for the number one option. If you look at the, I make this point a lot, but if you look at the quote-unquote league leaders in turnovers every year, the top 15, 20 guys, 90% of them are superstars because they have the ball in their hands all the time. The exception this year was Russell Westbrook, who's obviously not very good at this point in his career. But guys like, I don't know, Jason Tatum and Luka Doncic and James Harden and the on-ball guys have Nikola Jokic. The on-ball guys have lots of turnovers. But in this game, you can't have 10. That goes without saying. I think that if this was a different market, New York or Philadelphia, he would be getting a lot of heat right now because obviously in game 1, he was quite bad. Game 2, he was not as bad as he was in game 1, but you cannot turn the ball over 10 times in a game like this. He had almost as many turnovers by himself as the Hawks average as a team this year. So we'll see. I did think on the more positive side, Trey's defense was actually pretty frisky in this game. I thought he gave good effort defensively. He was not they were picking on him as they always are going to try to do, but I actually thought Gallo was more of a pick on target than Trey was in this game. I thought he was giving good effort, good physicality, and at least scrapping, doing what he can defensively. And again, as a scorer, he was okay. Just the turnovers were tough to see from Trey. I think he'll have at least 1, if not 2, explosive games that are pretty good in Atlanta when they come home. But through 2 games, he has not been as good as Butler, and that's been a shortcoming for the Hawks at this point in time. So, obviously, the Hawks are in a tough spot now. I'm not going to tell you the series is over. I know the narrative and the picking and the national discussion is going to be the series is over, and I get that. The number 1 seed's up 2-0. But the Hawks are coming home for 2 games, 3 and 4. And, of course, the Hawks were 20-3 in the last 23 games at home. That's probably a little bit aggressive as to what you can expect, but they'll have 2 full days off between games. They'll have the crowd going on their side, and the Hawks are very much capable of winning both games at home. That would not stun me. It shouldn't stun you if you're watching this team. Now, obviously, no one will pick the Hawks to win the series at this point. That includes me. As much as Hawks fans want you to pick the Hawks, like I think objectively, you cannot just go out and say, "Look, the Hawks are going to win 4 of the next 5 games." Can they do that? I actually believe they can. But picking is different than actually saying that they can do it. Obviously, Game 3 becomes a virtual must-win. If you go down 0-3, just the precedent there is just kind of against you. For what it's worth, 538 has the Hawks with a 12% chance to win the series. As of this moment, that seems not crazy to me. It might be a little bit higher than that, but not that much higher. The betting market, I've not seen BetOnline's numbers just yet. I would anticipate the Hawks being a very large underdog in the series. But at home, I think the Hawks might be a very small underdog in Game 3 in terms of like the actual point spread. If you do the math on this, it was 7.5 in Miami. You take away a couple points for home court and then add a couple more to home court for the Hawks. It might be like Hawks +1, Hawks +2, maybe even like pick them in Game 3. So we'll see. We'll obviously have some coverage in between now and then, but clearly it's a kitchen sink game for the Hawks. They have to throw everything they have at Game 3. Hopefully Trey will have a superstar level game. Jimmy Butler hopefully will miss a shot or two if you're a Hawks fan along the way. But certainly my overall thought process is that the Hawks were good enough to win a game today. Miami played well, and Butler kind of willed them over the top. If they play better than this, they will probably win Game 3. But you can't assume that. So you have to replicate that. The Hawks are due, quote unquote, for an offensive explosion because through 2 games they've been pretty bad on offense. This is a team that's the top 3 offense in the NBA this year. So if they're looking for hope, that is probably going to be where it is. But Friday night under the lights, we'll have at least one podcast, maybe even 2, but at least one. I will guarantee you one in between now and Friday night's game. And then we'll have, of course, our usual wrap-up show after Game 3. And then the Hawks, by the way, play Sunday as well in Game 4. That's, of course, locked into the schedule. So Friday night and Sunday in Atlanta. Stay tuned. If you're a local person, I'm sure tickets are going to be flying off the shelves for those 2. So we'll see what happens in those games. But hopefully that will wrap up today's podcast in appropriate fashion. If you have questions, you can always ask me at BT Rowland on Twitter or at Locked On Hawks on Twitter. Please follow those accounts if you'd like to, as well as please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. As I looked before this podcast, we were very close to our 1,000 goal subscriber count on YouTube. Of course, I'm not going to stop you there. I want you to keep subscribing on YouTube and Apple and Spotify, especially. But please cross over, even if you're not planning to watch a ton on YouTube. The subscription just helps us. If you want to support the show, that's a huge way to do that. Thank you for listening to the podcast. As always, everybody, hopefully not too much panic in the streets here. The Hawks did play much better, which is certainly gives you some hope for Game 3 and beyond. And we'll see you later on in the week.